Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. Prize season feels like it's in full swing now, and so I'm here to take a little swing at some international Booker Prize predictions and what I think is going to make it onto the long list. The dates of the prize have only just been announced, which are, I think the 11th of March is when we'll get the long list of 12 or 13 books. The 9th of April is when it will be whittled down to a short list of 6, and then on the 21st of May we'll find out who the winner is. Last year I did some predictions, and I think I only got 2 guesses out of my 13 correct, which is pretty shoddy. However, I'm going to give myself a little bit of slack because one of the 2 ended up being the winner of the prize, so I'm not too upset. To be completely honest though, I've not really had my finger on the pulse of translated fiction this year, probably owing to the fact that I've been reading along with some primarily English language prizes like the Women's Prize and the Booker. Of the books that I'm going to be predicting today, I've actually only read one of them, but why let that get in the way of a little bit of fun? Before we get into the list, a quick recap of the rules. So, as a reminder, the book must be an English language translation that was released in the UK or Ireland between the 1st of May 2023 and the 30th of April 2024. So there could well be some books in the mix that have not yet come out. The author and the translator must both be living at the time that it's submitted, and they must stay alive throughout the process in order to remain eligible. So what that means is a book like Her Side of the Story by Alba de Céspedes, which is coming out very soon, would never have been eligible because she died in the 90s and it's just a new translation. But then something like No One Prayed Over Their Graves by Khalid Khalifa, that would have been eligible and might have been submitted, but he really sadly passed away last year, and so it's likely that it's no longer eligible. There are also some rules about the publisher being formally established in the UK or Ireland, which can make eligibility a little bit murky at times. And there are some rules to make sure people don't set up like a publisher to publish their own work and then they can just submit to the prize. Last year, I'm pretty sure there were also some rules around the book needing to be a first-time translation, but I couldn't find that wording in this year's rules, so I don't know if it's been removed or I've just missed it. As ever, these rules are at the discretion of the administrator of the prize, so who knows, it could be a complete free-for-all. I'm not going to do a deep dive on the judges, but the judging panel this year is headed up by Eleanor Wachtel. She's a highly decorated and highly respected Canadian writer and broadcaster, and she's hosted CBC Radio's flagship literary programme, Writers and Company, for I think something like 30 years, and her interviews are considered so good that 5 of them have been published, which is pretty cool. Anyway, on to the books, and I can't promise that every single book that I've picked is eligible. I know I made a few mistakes in the past, I'm sorry for those, and I can't promise it won't happen again. I've picked out 13 books which I've arranged into a bunch of categories because that's just an extra layer of fun. The first category I've got to run through is called the reserved spots, and this is covering the fact that there are some things that always seem to be true about the International Booker. There's always a big name book that gets snubbed and everyone's upset about it. In fact, that probably happens in most prizes. There's always too small a window between the announcement of the long list and the announcement of the short list. And I've got 3 books here which I think fulfill some of the other #IBP tropes that we expect to see every prize season. The first of these is the Fitzcarraldo. There is almost always a Fitzcarraldo on the list. There are a few eligible this year, but the one I've gone for is also the only book on the list that I've read, and that is Mild Vertigo by Mieko Kanai, translated from Japanese by Polly Barton. This is a story about the daily life of a housewife and basically the crushing boredom and loneliness of that life. It's a story of how it feels when nothing is everything. I didn't actually love this one too much, but I know a lot of people did, and I know the translation has been particularly highly praised because it does read like it was written in English. My next trope is the chunkster, because there always seems to be a really thick tome on the list, which is a bit of a struggle to try and get through ahead of the prize ceremony. Think things like the Books of Jacob or recent winner Tomb of Sand. Actually, I don't think there was one in 2023, but maybe that's the exception that proves the rule. Anyway, my pick for this is Mata 210 by Kwang Sok Yong, and that was translated from South Korean by Sora Kim Russell and Youngjae Josephine Bae. This is a new novel from a previous nominee that tells the story of 3 generations of ordinary working Koreans with a changing career in the background, going from like Japanese imperialism right through to independence. And I understand that this also has some magical realism elements. It's not the longest long book that the International Booker will have seen, and in fact weirdly it's not the longest book on my predictions list, but I have felt this one in person and it feels like a very chunky object. You could like definitely do some damage to someone with it, but it is only 486 pages. Finally, I've got the Rule Bender, and that's because in every year, and actually in quite a few prizes now, there always seems to be one book that kind of pushes the envelope and stretches the rules to their limits. My pick for this is Undiscovered by Gabriela Vina. Vina is a Peruvian author, and this has been translated from Spanish by Julia Sanchez. This, I think, toes the edges of the rules because it is so full of fact and real research. This is a semi-autobiographical novel based on Vina's own experience when she visits a museum exhibition in Paris about the spoils of European colonialism, and she sees this picture that has her own grandfather as one of the plunderers. So she uses this then as a bit of a starting point to delve into her family history and tie it to her own modern day experience. Sounds pretty interesting. My next grouping is called Colonial Asshattery because it's all about colonialists being asshats. I've got another 3 books in this category, starting off with Kibogo by Scholastic Mukasonga, translated from French by Mark Polizzotti. Oh, I actually have a copy of this. I think the main publication of this in the UK is actually from Daunt Books, and it's a slightly different cover, but this is a lovely archipelago edition that I found in my local indie. This is a novel in 4 parts about ancient Rwandan beliefs and customs, and then attempts to displace these by European Christians. It's supposed to be profound, but also pretty funny. I'm going to read this at some point soon. The second book in this group is Aidnan by Linnea Axelsson, translated from Swedish by Saskia Vogel. This is an epic, which is basically a poem of novel length, and it tells the story of 2 indigenous Sami families and their struggle living through a century of colonial displacement in northern Scandinavia. I think it's told across 2 time periods, one in the 1910s and one in the 1970s, but those kind of converse with one another and come together to tell this much bigger, more protracted story. I'm not sure about reading a book in verse, but some people have been reading this and absolutely love it, and I think the UK cover in particular is just gorgeous. Finally, I've got You Dreamed of Vampires by Alvaro Enrique, translated from Spanish by Natasha Wimmer, or maybe it's Natasha Wimmer, not 100% sure. Enrique is a Mexican author, and this is a story set in the 16th century about a meeting between a Spanish conquistador and an Aztec emperor in what is now Mexico City. It's supposed to be very clever and inventive, satirical and lots of fun, and I've seen a few people say that it's unlike anything they've ever read. And I think the International Booker does tend to reward books that do something a little bit different. The next grouping is called The Never-Ending Struggle of Women, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, and there are 4 books in this category, starting with Out of Earth by Brazilian author Sheila Smanioto, and this is translated from Portuguese by Sophie Lewis and Laura Garmison. This one is about 4 generations of women in Brazil and the hardships they suffer, with men in the background, but ultimately revealed as the cause of the suffering. It's written in small little vignettes, and it's recently been nominated for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, so I think there's a good chance we could see it here too. Then I've got another Brazilian book actually called The Simple Art of Killing a Woman by Patricia Mello, translated from Portuguese also by Sophie Lewis. This one's a little bit of a thriller, and it's about a young woman who is a lawyer, and she accepts an assignment out on an Amazonian border town, and she does this because she wants to escape her overprotective family. She ends up investigating an epidemic of violence against women, and then she also has some trippy experiences on ayahuasca, which is that like hallucinogenic drug from a cactus. It sounds not too far away from the sort of stuff that Claudio Pinheiro does, but with a little bit more unhinged crazy stuff. And I think that sounds great. Finally, we've got Confrontations, a book by Simone Antigana Bacono. This is translated from Dutch by Suzanne Huykensveld Janssen. This book is about a 16-year-old girl, and she's being held in a secure unit for young offenders because she snapped at some bullies. I don't know exactly what she's done, but she has been locked away as a result of it. And over the course of the novel, she explores her rage and what she thinks about punishment and incarceration, and how it specifically intersects with her experience as a black woman. I saw a little bit of buzz around this on Instagram around its publication day, and it just sounds really interesting to me. The next book is one from a former winner, and there are a few former winners who have got eligible books out this year, including David Diop, who's got The Door of No Return, as well as a new book from last year's winners Georgi Gospodinov called The Physics of Sorrow, I think. I'm not including either of those in my predictions though. I am going for My Heavenly Favourite by Lucas Reineveld, translated from Danish by Michelle Hutchison. This one just seems to have been getting absolutely rave reviews in the press and has been praised for how beautifully written it is. The subject, however, is a little bit heavy, and I think it's about a man approaching 50 who is obsessed and gets into a little bit of a weird codependent relationship with a 14-year-old girl. And I believe the way it's written is in the form of like him addressing the girl and blaming her for everything, although I'm not 100% sure on that. I have to be honest, I really did not enjoy The Discomfort of Evening. I thought it was not a particularly well-written book, and I don't think it really earned some of the gross out moments that it had. But I seem to be the outlier here, and so I think this stands a pretty good chance of being longlisted. My final grouping of 3 books is called Secret Histories, and these are books about someone uncovering or revealing some interesting and exciting past. The first book in this group is one that I'm probably most excited about from the list because it sounds absolutely fantastic, and it's The Most Secret Memory of Men by Mohamed Mbougar Sarr. He is a Senegalese author, and this has been translated from French by Laura Vergnaud. This one is about a man who finds this legendary book that he becomes absolutely obsessed with, and there's a bit of a mystery surrounding the author of the book, who was accused of plagiarism and then disappeared into obscurity, and the main character becomes really obsessed with uncovering the truth about what happened. And so he goes on this grand tour to find out, touching on colonialism and dictatorships and resistance, tying it together to tell, I guess, this really ambitious story that orbits around this mysterious book. I hadn't heard about this one until I was researching for potential long listees, but it really stands out to me as one that could be fantastic. Then the penultimate book on my list is Verdigris by Michele Mari. This has been translated from Italian by Brian Robert Moore. This one is about a young teenager visiting his grandparents' estate, where he tries to unpick the mysterious biography of the groundskeeper, who is also losing his memory. I thumbed through this one. It has some weird use of vernacular that came across as very English, which seems like quite an interesting translation challenge. I'm not sure how much I would actually enjoy this book, but it has been getting some really good reviews. My final pick then is The Understory by Sanne Sangsuk, and this has been translated from Thai by Mui Pupoxical. I apologise if I've butchered the pronunciation there. I couldn't actually find any reference online for how to say it properly, but I did try. Anyway, this one is about a 93-year-old abbot in a small Thai village who enchants the local children with stories of his long and extraordinary life, and in particular, stories about a tiger. Sounds really interesting and magical, and reminds me a little bit of the 100-year-old man who climbed out of the window, which I did not like, but I imagine that this one might be a good version of that. So those are my 13 predictions. Will they end up being the list? Almost certainly not. I'm missing some publishers who have had some real success in the International Booker in recent years, including Charco Press and Tilted Axis. So I expect books from those publishers might make some appearances, but I didn't want to overthink it, and so I just went with books that I thought sounded really interesting. Let me know down in the comments what books you think might make an appearance when we get our hands on the list in just a few short weeks' time. But until next time, toodles.